what I saw, I wouldn't want any parent to go through. I could look in the room. There's writing all over the wall. I kind of just was in shock for the whole day. I knew something was wrong. That's not my daughter. She would call me all the time, talk about, Daddy, I'm checking on you. And I'd be like, no, I'm checking on you. You know, that was our little joke. And I knew something was wrong as soon as I got there.
Yeah, that was our baby. And as many people in Houston knew her and loved her, she was as sweet with them as she is with us. She took care of people. She's just a sweetheart. And my baby's gone from a tragic event that didn't have to happen. Being strangled to death is a horrible way to die. And my baby's gone. And it was horrible to even think about it.
What do you do when a loved one vanishes, leaving only questions and no answers? Lled Gagnier lived her life in vibrant color. A stunning Instagram model with 2.6 million followers, she captivated audiences with her beauty, confidence, and infectious energy. But in August 2021, her bright light was suddenly extinguished. One weekend, her phone calls went unanswered. Her social media fell silent. And a father's worst fears were confirmed when he decided to break down her apartment door. The case of Lled Gagnier would leave her family devastated, and the truth would become even harder to find as twists and turns rocked the investigation. What turns admiration into a deadly obsession? How does a stranger from hundreds of miles away become fixated on someone they've never met? And what dark realities lie behind the perfect images we share with the world? By the time investigators pieced together what happened in those final moments, a truth would emerge, one that exposed the unseen dangers lurking behind every like, comment, and follow. This is the story of Miss Mercedes Morr, a woman whose digital footprint led a killer straight to her door. Thank you for joining today's case. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications. We share real stories that deserve to be heard, and your voice matters too. So feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Lled Gagnier was more than just an Instagram sensation. Born and raised in Texas, she possessed a natural charisma that drew people to her long before she gained millions of followers online. Friends describe her as fiercely loyal, quick to laugh, and someone who lit up every room she entered. Behind the carefully curated photos was a woman with dreams of launching her own fashion line, supporting her family, and eventually settling down. Growing up in a close-knit family, Lled maintained strong ties with her parents, Mark Gagnier and Janetta Grover. Their bond remained unbroken even as her online fame grew. Her father would later say that despite her growing celebrity status, she always made time for Sunday dinners and family celebrations. As Miss Mercedes Morr, Lled built a personal brand that attracted collaborations with major fashion companies. Her distinctive style and engaging personality turned followers into devoted fans. But this visibility would ultimately expose her to dangers she could never have anticipated. In the weeks before that fateful August weekend, Lled's life followed its normal rhythm. She posted regularly on Instagram, attended several promotional events in Houston, and made plans with friends for the upcoming Labor Day weekend. Nothing in her behavior suggested any concern or awareness of the threat that was quietly closing in. The weekend of August 28th began like any other. Lled posted a photo on Saturday morning showing her in a new outfit, captioned with her trademark confidence. She exchanged texts with several friends about meeting up the following week. Her last known phone call was to her sister around 8 p.m. Saturday evening, a normal conversation about an upcoming family gathering. By Sunday morning, August 29th, something had changed. Friends reported that their messages went unread. Calls went straight to voicemail. For a woman who was typically responsive and active on social media, this silence was unusual. Her scheduled Sunday afternoon post never appeared. As hours passed without contact, concern grew among her inner circle. Her father, Mark Gagnier, had a standing agreement with his daughter. If she didn't respond to his calls within 24 hours, something was wrong. By Sunday evening, that threshold had been crossed. The timeline of those critical hours would later become central to the investigation. Security footage from Jenna's Richmond apartment complex showed her arriving home Saturday evening around 9:30 p.m. A food delivery arrived shortly after. Then, at approximately 11:45 p.m., external cameras captured an unfamiliar figure entering the building. The first tangible clue that something was amiss wasn't discovered until Mark Gagnier forced his way into his daughter's apartment on Sunday evening. Her phone was still there, unusual for someone rarely separated from it. Her purse remained untouched. The apartment showed subtle signs of disturbance, items slightly out of place, a glass of water left unfinished on the counter, and the air conditioning set lower than Jenna typically preferred. These seemingly insignificant details would soon transform into crucial evidence as investigators began to piece together the final hours of Jenna Gagnier's life and identify the stranger who had traveled across state lines with a deadly obsession. How far would you go if it were your loved one who didn't come home? At what point does hope begin to turn into fear? Share your thoughts below. The discovery of Jenna Gagnier's body sent shockwaves through Richmond, Texas. Police responded within minutes of Mark Gagnier's frantic 911 call, immediately securing the scene as detectives and forensic teams descended on the upscale apartment complex. What they found inside would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. Richmond Police Detective Sarah Townsend, a 15-year veteran specializing in violent crimes, took the lead on the case. The moment I walked into that apartment, I knew this wasn't a random act of violence, she would later reveal. The scene told a story of obsession and calculation that went beyond anything we typically see. Meanwhile, the news of Jenna's death spread like wildfire through social media, the very platform that had made her famous now amplifying her tragic end. Fans created virtual memorials, sharing photos and messages of disbelief. The hashtag Justice for Mercedes Morr began trending within hours, bringing national attention to the case. For the Gagnier family, the nightmare had only begun. As investigators processed the crime scene, Mark and Janetta were faced with the unimaginable task of identifying their daughter's body. No parent should ever have to do that, Mark later said in a tearful interview. You're not supposed to outlive your children. As the family struggled with their grief, they also became vocal advocates for justice, appearing at press conferences and using their platform to push for answers. Janetta Grover established a foundation in her daughter's name, aimed at raising awareness about stalking and online harassment. The initial investigation focused on Jenna's wide circle of acquaintances. Given her public profile, detectives compiled a lengthy list of people who had been in contact with her in recent months. Ex-boyfriends, business associates, and even overzealous fans were all scrutinized as potential suspects. One name that quickly rose to the top of the list was Marcus Reynolds, a Houston entrepreneur who had been seen arguing with Jenna at an event just 2 weeks before her death. Witnesses reported an intense exchange that ended with Reynolds making what could be construed as a threat. When questioned, Reynolds vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he was in Austin the entire weekend. But his alibi initially showed discrepancies that warranted further investigation.
And ever.
Another promising lead emerged when detectives reviewed Jenna's financial records and discovered a series of anonymous gifts delivered to her address over the previous 3 months. Expensive jewelry with no return address or indication of who sent them. The timing corresponded with increasingly concerned messages Jenna had sent to friends about feeling watched. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Jenna's former roommate, Tasha Wilson, came forward with information that seemed to point toward a stalking situation, but not one involving the eventual killer. According to Wilson, Jenna had been receiving threatening messages from a woman claiming to be the wife of a professional athlete who had been messaging Jenna on Instagram. She showed me the messages, Wilson told detectives. This woman was unhinged, saying Jenna had ruined her marriage and that she would make her pay for it. This revelation sent investigators down a completely different path, leading them to Vanessa Carter, the estranged wife of NBA player Darius Carter. When questioned, Vanessa admitted to sending the messages but had a verifiable alibi for the weekend of the murder. She was in Mexico with friends, with ample photographic and witness evidence to support her claim. Just as the investigation seemed to be circling back to square one, a crucial piece of technological evidence emerged. Jenny's apartment complex had recently upgraded its security system, installing a network of cameras that was more comprehensive than initially believed. Additional footage recovered from a secondary server showed a man entering the building Saturday night, a man who didn't match the description of any known associates or suspects. Enhanced images revealed a tattoo on the man's right forearm, a distinctive design that, when run through law enforcement databases, led to an unexpected breakthrough. The tattoo matched one belonging to Kevin Alexander Accordo, a 34-year-old man from Florida with a history of making concerning posts about female social media personalities. Detective Townsend immediately dispatched officers to Accordo's last known address in Florida, only to discover he hadn't been seen there in over 2 weeks. His landlord reported that Accordo had abruptly given notice, saying he was going to meet someone special and might not return. Cell phone records would later confirm that Accordo's phone had pinged towers progressively moving westward from Florida to Texas over the course of 3 days before Jenny's death. What remained unclear was the connection. How had this man from hundreds of miles away fixated on Jenny specifically? The investigation intensified when another model with a similar following to Jenny's came forward with screenshots of disturbing messages she had received from accounts linked to Accordo. The messages revealed an escalating fantasy relationship that existed entirely in his mind, with the man believing he had established a deep connection with women who had never interacted with him. But just as investigators began to build a profile of Accordo and his possible motives, a shocking discovery in his Florida apartment would turn the case on its head. Hidden behind a false wall in his closet, police found an elaborate shrine dedicated not just to Jenny, but to 5 other Instagram models, complete with printed photos, personal information, and detailed plans for making contact with each of them. Among the items recovered was a journal containing entries that grew increasingly erratic and disturbing in the weeks leading up to Jenny's death. The final entry, dated just 3 days before the murder, contained a statement: "They can't ignore me forever. Mercedes will understand once I show her how much she needs me." But just as the investigation began to uncover the truth about Accordo's obsession, an unexpected discovery would leave everyone stunned and reveal that the danger to other women on his list remained very real. Everything shifted the moment investigators unlocked Jenny Gagnier's phone. Inside, they found a disturbing series of videos, some recorded by Jenny herself, others believed to have been taken by her killer. These weren't just fragments of her last hours. They were pieces of a story that confirmed detectives' growing suspicions. This wasn't random. This man had been watching her, following her, and planning something dark long before he ever crossed her path. The suspect, Kevin Alexander Accordo, had driven from Florida to Texas without any clear connection to Jenny. He had no history with her, no personal relationship, and no real-life communication. But digital traces began to form a picture. He had been tracking her through her online presence, forming an unhealthy attachment to a woman who didn't even know he existed. Investigators believe he may have convinced himself that he had a relationship with her, when in reality, there was none. Surveillance footage showed Kevin arriving at the apartment complex days before Jenny was found. There was no sign of forced entry, which meant he either followed her in, waited until the door was unlocked, or somehow gained access unnoticed. Inside the apartment, the scene was violent. It was clear Jenny fought back. The medical examiner reported both strangulation and blunt force trauma. And yet, in the end, she lost her life in her own home, a space where she should have been. Jenny's father, Mark Gagnier, was one of the first to enter the apartment after she stopped responding to calls. What he found will never leave him. Speaking to reporters, he said, "My daughter didn't know this man. He just showed up at her house and did what he did. She was a loving, generous, and private person. This never should have happened." Those closest to her were left reeling, not only from her sudden loss, but from the senselessness of it all. The investigation made one thing painfully clear. Jenna's death was the result of a stranger's obsession. A person she'd never met created a fantasy so convincing in his own mind that he was willing to kill for it. There was no argument, no motive rooted in reality, just a tragic collision between visibility and delusion. And by the time the truth came out, it was too late to save her. When the full truth about Jenna Gagnier's death finally reached her family, it was like being hit by another wave of grief, one that came with no warning, no comfort, and no room for peace. Her father, who had found her lifeless body, now had to grapple with the fact that his daughter's killer had been hiding in her home, alive, just moments before the police arrived. Even worse, he had ended his own life upstairs while Jenna's body lay below. There would be no trial, no sentencing, and no courtroom testimony. No chance to face the man who had taken her from them. And that absence of justice left a painful, permanent void. At first, the family tried to process the unimaginable by focusing on who Jenna truly was. Not the headlines, not the theories, but the real woman behind the public persona. Her sister described her as generous, deeply spiritual, and constantly looking for ways to help people. She may have been known online as Mercedes Morr, but to them, she was simply Jenna, someone who loved music, poetry, and her family above all else. Her mother shared in an interview, "She had this light. People online saw the beauty, but we saw the soul. She was ours." In the days that followed, the family held a candlelight vigil outside her apartment. Hundreds of people showed up, friends, fans, neighbors, and strangers who felt connected to her story. But the investigation sparked a wider conversation around online safety and the dangers of parasocial relationships, when strangers form intense, one-sided attachments to public figures. Jenna hadn't interacted with Kevin Alexander Accordo. She hadn't led him on or encouraged any attention. And yet, he had been watching her, learning her routines, and ultimately deciding she belonged to him. Law enforcement acknowledged that the case exposed blind spots in how digital footprints are monitored and how obsession can escalate without warning. One detective admitted, "We're only just beginning to understand how social media can give someone access to your life, without your permission and without you knowing." In Texas and beyond, her case forced influencers and creators to rethink their safety. Some hired security. Others pulled back from public life entirely. The emotional cost was high. Women who had built their lives online were now afraid to open their doors. Even Jenna's father began speaking publicly, not as a grieving dad, but as a voice calling for change. He pushed for stronger laws to protect individuals from stalking, digital and physical, and for better mental health resources to catch dangerous behavior before it turns violent. But the twists didn't stop there. Months after her death, detectives revealed that Kevin had been on law enforcement's radar in Florida just weeks before the murder. He had been detained after a mental health crisis, but released due to a lack of evidence that he posed a threat. That revelation only deepened the family's sorrow. Could her death have been prevented? Was there a moment when the system had a chance to intervene and failed? In response, a handful of local legislators introduced bills focused on better information sharing between states when it comes to individuals with known psychiatric issues and violent tendencies. Some proposed a digital registry for stalkers and online harassers, similar to what exists for sex offenders. It was controversial. It didn't pass, but it was a start, a sign that Jenna's death had stirred something larger than one tragic story. To this day, her family continues to honor her memory. A scholarship was created in her name for young women pursuing careers in the arts. Her Instagram remains untouched, a digital memorial flooded with comments from people still grieving, still remembering, still searching for answers. One message reads, "You didn't deserve this. We miss you every day." And though the case has closed, the scars remain open. There was no trial, no sentencing, no justice in the traditional sense. Just a quiet ache that sits in every room she once walked through, every holiday missed, every phone call unanswered. Jenny's story is no longer about a crime. It's about what happens when someone loses their life to a stranger's delusion. And how, for the ones left behind, the aftermath never really ends. In the end, what happened to Jenny Gagnier wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a devastating example of how obsession, mental instability, and the illusion of access can lead to irreversible loss. She did everything right. She kept her personal life private. She didn't engage with strangers. And yet, someone decided that admiring her from afar wasn't enough. That distorted desire ended in a moment of irreversible destruction and left a family shattered, a community mourning, and a nation questioning how this could happen. Justice, in this case, came without a trial. There was no courtroom testimony, no guilty verdict to offer closure. Her killer took his own life before anyone could ask him why. And maybe that's the part that hurts most. Not just that Jenny was taken, but that the people who loved her never got to look the man responsible in the eye and ask the questions that still echo every day. Her father once said, "The silence he left behind is louder than any apology could have ever been." As we close this chapter, we ask you to think about what justice really looks like when the damage is permanent. Can closure exist without answers? What was the true motive behind this tragedy? Was it love twisted into control, or was it something darker that we may never fully understand? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share what you believe Jenny's story teaches us about the world we live in. And if you or someone you know is struggling with obsessive thoughts, mental health issues, or the effects of online harassment, speak up. Seek help, because silence only allows tragedy to grow in the dark. Jenny deserved more than a story like this. She deserved time. She deserved peace. And so do the people who loved her. See you in my next video. Please leave a comment, share, like, and subscribe for more true crime cases.